After being told by several people that I needed to look into this because it looked like the government was complicit, and for a while I would look at possible websites and so on, and I didn't find it convincing. And finally I found Paul Thompson's work, which has now been published as a book called The Terror Timeline. And it had an amazing amount of material drawn from strictly mainline sources that simply contradicted the official account. So I started reading more and more stuff, and I read Nafiz Ahmed's book, The War on Freedom. I read then Terry Mason's book on Pentagate and 9/11, The Big Lie. And then I did learn more about what was going on the internet. I never had been an internet person. And I saw that a lot of people had been working on this for a long time, but most of them were people who would never be able to get a book published. And I thought, well, since I've published about 25 books before, maybe I would have a shot at it. Even then, it was much more difficult than I thought. Most publishers simply wouldn't respond to my letters. But I kept at it till I found brave little Interlink books which was willing to do it. And so first of all, I just thought it was a duty, the fact that this enormous amount of research had been done, and that it certainly presented a credible case that people needed to know about, and that maybe I was in position to bring that to the public. So for the most part, the new Pearl Harbor has hardly any original material in it. It's mainly just an organization of work that other people has done, and a presentation of it in a fairly brief and fairly readable way. So that was the primary motivation. Certainly, I was also motivated by these other concerns. As a theologian, I'm committed to the good of the whole universe, the good of the whole earth. And if it looks like there is a gang that has gotten control of our government and our purse strings to use it for very selfish and imperialistic purposes, then that needs to be exposed. There has been a long history. We're sitting here in California. We stole this from the Mexicans by deliberately fabricating an incident where we were in on their property, and then they were accused of shedding American blood on American property. The congressman at the time named Abraham Lincoln called this a shameless lie. Likewise, when we took over Cuba, the Philippines, and Hawaii, and a few other islands, Puerto Rico and Guam and so on, there was a battleship there in the harbor just put down there for nobody knows quite why. And there was a big explosion on the battleship. This, of course, the battleship Maine, and everybody knows the slogan, "Remember the Maine, the hell was Spain." And it's still a mystery exactly what happened, but we certainly used it as an incident and accused Spain falsely of having blown up the Maine. That's the last thing Spain would have done. Likewise, the war in the Philippines the following year was started by an incident that the soldier in charge admitted that he was told to start the war as an incident, and so on. And more recently, people know about the Gulf of Tonkin, that those events never happened, which were really when the Vietnam War went full scale. So there is a long history, and there's also the famous or notorious Operations Northwoods document. When General Eisenhower was just about to leave office, he desperately wanted to invade Cuba to get rid of Fidel Castro, but time ran out. The plan passed over to President Kennedy, but then there was the little Bay of Pigs fiasco. Kennedy took Cuban planning away from the CIA, gave it to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They came in with this plan, which would involve killing American citizens and blaming the Cubans as a pretext to invade Cuba. Kennedy turned it down. Another president might have accepted it. But those documents have now been published, and many people know about them through James Bamford's work, House of Secrets, about the National Security Agency. So there is a long history of planning, fabricating incidents. There's a whole question about the original Pearl Harbor, which I don't go into in my book, but certainly Robert Stinnett has made a very strong claim for the old idea, but he gives much more evidence for it, that we knew full well that those attacks were coming, and in fact that we actually squeezed the Japanese until they believed they had no choice but to make that preemptive attack. So yes, there is a very long history. So many people who reject the idea that there could be any kind of conspiracy do it on an a priori basis. They say, well, our government would never do such a thing. Our military, they're so protective of human rights and the precious sacredness of every human life. They would never do anything like this. Well, people just need to learn the history and realize that 3,000 lives taken on 9/11, in terms of the kind of cost-benefit analysis that the military is trained to do and that the CIA is trained to do, this was a very, what they would call high cost-benefit operation. When you look at Vietnam, that enterprise, you're talking about tens of thousands of Americans killed after we knew the war was futile, after we knew we could not win, and we were simply fighting to save American credibility. Tens of thousands were sacrificed. So to kill 3,000 on 9/11, given that kind of mindset that thinks in those terms, this was not a bad price to pay. Well, the immediate thing, of course, is if you become convinced you've got criminals in the White House, get rid of them. More long-term, we need to overcome plutocracy. Plutocracy is where democracy is ruled by the people, of the people, for the people. Plutocracy is ruled by the rich, of the rich, for the rich. And we have a system now in which the richest 1 to 5% of the country calls the shots for America, and therefore calls the shots for the world. So we need to, this may sound simplistic, but the biggest single step we could take would be to get rid of all private financing of elections. That's why these politicians cannot tell the truth. That's why they can't buck the corporations. That's why we only get rich people or people who are sponsored by rich corporations who can run for national office. So we need public financing so that honest people can get in the government and pass laws, and then we can get honest people in the White House who will execute those laws. So I would say that would be the next thing. And thirdly, work for global democracy, and in my forthcoming books I'll be describing the reasons for that.